Lecture. All right, good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? Good. I know. You'd rather be sleeping. Me too. I'm a fan of bed. And yes, you are a bit of a zombie. Actually, during the time you're going to school here at Full Sail, I describe you guys as art zombies, because pretty much all you do is create art and sort of shamble from one building or room to another. So you become very efficient with your use of energy, very minimalistic responses, but you do settle down and do your art, which is cool. But the good news is after 2 years, it all stops. So just hold on till then, tie a knot and hang on. So we got a bunch of fun stuff to talk about today. But one thing I wanted to start off with before we delve into any of that is the fact that we have a lab session scheduled for tomorrow. I don't know if any of you guys saw that. It's we've got like 2 hours of lab, and you're wondering what the heck is that? How did that get stuck there, and what's going on? And of course, this only applies to my local class. But in terms of that chunk of time, if you take a look at, I believe it's December 13th, you'll notice that we only have 4 hours of lab instead of 6. They like cut us off for some strange reason. So what they did was they took that 2 hours and stuck it over here on Sunday. Does that make sense a little bit? Yeah, I'm not really sure how the heck that happened or why that happened, but you know, mine is to make it work, not to question. So in terms of what we're going to do is, instead of having a classroom meeting where we get together, so we don't have to be here tomorrow from 1 to 3, I believe is the time slot it is, 13 to 15. I don't do military math well. But from 13 to 15, rather than being here, we're going to do the help session, the lab, as an online environment. So what'll happen is I will send you guys a link to use to register. And actually the link is already on FSO for my online folks. So if you go to, there's an activity on FSO called GTT registration. And you're probably like, what the heck is that? Well, these go to trainings, these lectures that I do every day are recorded on an application, a website called Go to Training. So what'll happen is, if you go to that register for Go to Training, click on the link, sign yourself up, and literally all you have to do is put in your name and your email address, and then launch that on tomorrow at 1. Then what it'll do is sign you into this like online environment, so we'll all be there together. And basically what that environment will be for you is help. So if you need some help, you know, great time to be Gesundheit. Working on Maya is that time slot, because if you have any questions or any problems, we're going to be there to help you out. So definitely make sure you get to that session. Go and get the help you need. And, you know, and even if you feel like, oh, I got a handle on this, I'm pretty good, go to the session anyway, and, you know, just work alongside it. Because if you do happen to have a question, it's great to have somebody right there to help answer it for you. So that 2 hour time slot that we have to make sure that we earn will be an online environment, not an in the classroom one. And that way you guys don't have to all hustle down and get it back in here in this classroom on a Sunday, which is nice, because then you can get help in your pajamas, which is one of my favorites. You know, just put on your fuzzy bunny slippers and your pajamas and get a box of Pop-Tarts, strawberry rainbow sprinkles, and you can get your help session at home. You don't even have to change your outfit. You can stay in your onesie, your Darth Vader onesie. Yeah, go ahead. It's activity, thank you, Brian. It's activity number 4, GTT registration link. And again, it's a very simple process. You either click on the link, or you can highlight the link, because I wrote it in 2 places for you. You can highlight the link and just paste that into your address bar, and that works the same. So either or, but get yourself registered, and then you just show up to that session. It's super easy. And again, great resource for getting some help. Alrighty. Any questions on that, by the way? It is pretty straightforward, but you know, if it's something you've not done before, it can be intimidating. Yeah. That's correct. Yep. You could register for all of them if you want, but you are typically here live, so that's usually not an issue. But let's just say, for example, you decided that you were going to be in Guam on Tuesday of next week. You could still sign in and watch the live lecture. It should be your activity number 4 on FSO. Yeah, it's within Let's Get Started. Yep, there's like a start. Oh, no, not in week 1. What I did was I broke it up in terms of, hey, welcome to the class. This is what's going on. This is all the material you need. Big warm hugs. And then, okay, let's get busy. Week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. Does that make sense? So none of those things are going on in those other areas. I'm just trying to structure it. It made sense to me. All right, Gesundheit. Anybody else? We good on that? Let's get started. Activity 4. Okay. All righty, well, let's get into today's material, lecture 2. All kinds of fun stuff going on. We're going to be talking about more stuff that we're looking for when we're grading. Obviously, we're going to get into some tools and get some more vocabulary under our belt. But it starts with discussion of proportion and scale. Proportion and scale sound like they're pretty much the same thing, but there's definitely a distinct difference between the two. So we're going to try to separate those two things for you so it makes a little bit more sense. Let's first talk about proportion. When we are talking about proportion, what we are talking about is comparison of parts of an object to other parts of the same object. And that's where we get the proportion or relative proportions of something. For example, human beings tend to be 7.5 heads tall. We use the head as a unit of measurement to figure out our proportion. Superheroes tend to be like 10 heads tall because they're larger than life. But these proportions allow us to figure out overall the spatial relationship or the orientation and spatial relationship between parts of an object, again, in comparison to other parts of the same object. Now, where proportion can really help us out in some instances is in determination of gender. If you look at human characters, typically the male characters have broader shoulders and narrower hips, and the female characters tend to have narrower shoulders and broader hips. Now, when we talk about general proportions, most people fit into the bell curve of proportions into those proportional categories. There's always people on either side that are sort of different than that bell curve, somewhat of a different proportion and scale, but overall, most of us fit within those general characteristics. So again, we can determine gender just from the relative proportion of whatever it is we happen to be looking at. So how does this fit into what we're grading for? Well, if this is my reference image here, Gesundheit, these lamps are of the correct proportion relative to the reference and would earn the points associated with proportion. These lamps are too different. They represent too much of a divergence from the original proportions and therefore does not earn the points for proportion. And what you will notice about proportion is there's not a great deal of flexibility. You can see it's a pretty narrow margin there, so you got to be pretty close on. Now, the good news is when it comes to proportion, since we are building objects utilizing reference images in the form of image planes, we're going to have a very easy time of hitting proportion. So you almost have to try to not hit proportion, but just so that you realize that's where that comes from. Any questions on proportion? Okay, again, pretty straightforward, but always a good idea to ask. So how does that differ from scale? Well, when we're talking about scale, what we're doing is we're comparing objects to other objects in that same universe. So we can determine scale once we have a point of reference. So, for example, if you take a look at these tugboats, you might have a hard time determining, are those real tugboats or are those toy tugboats? How many of you guys think those are real tugboats? Okay, how many of you think you guys are toy tugboats? Okay, toy definitely has the advantage there. How many of you are not voting because you're afraid or asleep? Okay, I got a couple of those too. Of course, if you're sleeping, you can't vote. And stay away from politics. Back over here. So here, in terms of the tugboats, there was a good line there. I let it go. You'd be proud of me, Brian. All right, so here's the tugboats, right? These are actually toy tugboats. They're remote controlled. They're about this big. If you go to SeaWorld, you can drive them. Not that I'm doing ads for SeaWorld, but it is pretty fun. But point being, without a point of reference, it's kind of difficult to determine how big these things really are. So what we need when we're talking about scale is we need other objects to help us figure out the relative size of things. So either this guy is humongous or these guys are teeny weeny. I'm not sure which it is, but it definitely helps me figure out the scale of the scene based on the elements that are in that scene. So, something we grade on? For shizzle. So if we're looking at scale, again, this is my reference image, a collection of objects, so more of a representation of the still life at the end of this class when we make a still life of everything all together. So these objects are in the correct relative scale to each other when we bring them all together into a final scene. If you look at this final scene, you can see that the objects relative to our reference, things are out of scale. Things are the wrong size, and you can see it right away. The picture frame is way too small. The ice decanter is huge. The lamps are too small. So issues with scale become readily apparent. So if scale's so important, how do we figure it out? Well, in any given project that you are working on, there is a scale that the entire team is given, and we're all working from the same scale. That way, when you build an object, ultimately when it comes into the final scene, everything fits together the right size. Because if everybody's building with different scales, when we bring everything together, nothing fits. Because we don't build a room, build everything in the room, build all the people in the room. We literally have a Maya file for every separate element. So if I'm doing an animation of a classroom with a bunch of students, I'm going to have a Maya file for this podium. I'm going to have a Maya file for Brian. I'm going to have a Maya file for you. I'm going to have a Maya file for your laptop. I'm going to have a Maya file for your mouse. Does that make sense? All separate Maya files. But ultimately, everything will come together into one final scene. So if we have a scale we're all working from, everything's the right size. So when we bring it all together, it fits. Does that make sense? Okay, so for our scale, 1 grid unit in Maya is equal to 1 inch. So if you have a 5-inch object in the real world, it will be 5 grid units tall in Maya. What's a grid unit? Let's touch on that again. Grid units are these really cool lines that we see inside of Maya. Now granted, in the perspective view, they represent the surface of the world that we're building. But if you go to your orthographic views, you'll see we have grid units in here. Does that make sense? Each one of those grid units is 1 inch. Now, when it comes to building the objects that we're building, something else you need to be aware of is that we can determine how big the object is by taking a look at, let me go into my level 1 folder. Let's look at the coil. So if you are building the coil asset for one of your level 1 folder objects, you'll notice that we have a whole bunch of reference images for this stuff, some of which are in the scene and some of which are sort of just included to help you see what the object looks like from different perspectives. These additional images are all in the source images folder of the object you're trying to build. But if you open that image up, you'll see that there's a grid in the background for those images. And the way this grid works is 2 grid units in here is equal to 1 grid unit in Maya. So if you're looking at this object and you say it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 grid units high, it's going to be 6 grid units in Maya. Does that make sense? So you can convert this object to the correct scale for whatever it is you're building. Make sense? Get a hell yeah on that? Hell yeah. Good. Okay. So saith the door. All right. Boop. Vocabulary. Anytime you see one of these little periwinkle things, it's a vocabulary item, which is obviously something we are grading on. So that's going to be part of your self-grade document. So it's very important you understand what it means. And what we're going to talk about is layers. We touched on it a little bit last class, but I wanted to remind you that layers in Maya are much like layers in Photoshop, but more from an organizational capacity. We can create layers and put objects on layers, hide things, show things, template things, Gesundheit, all kinds of stuff happens with these layers in Maya. And they're super easy to create, and they are definitely your buddy. So let me show you how to create a layer in Maya. Here we are in Maya. Let's say I built a sphere, and it's the best sphere I've ever built in my life, but I need to have a layer for it. To create a layer, all you have to do is go to the layer editor in Maya, and you have to be in the channel box. So make sure that you click this little icon here in the way upper right. It's underneath this little lock. Click on that, and that opens your channel box. You also might see some tabs running down the side. And you'll see that there's a category here called layers. And if you click on that with the left mouse button, you will see create empty layer from selected or create empty layer. It doesn't matter. I'll use this one. And it makes a brand new layer. Now, in terms of that layer, you can name it. Actually, let me rephrase that. You will name it. And you want to name it something that corresponds to what is on that layer. An unnamed layer is pretty much useless. So what you want to do is make sure you double click on it and then give it a layer. I'm going to call mine Brian. So now I've got my Brian layer, but my Brian layer doesn't have anything on it yet. So what I want to do is select the object that I'd like to have on that layer, hold down the right mouse button over that layer, and you'll see Add Selected Objects as an option. So now this sphere is on my Brian layer. And then what's nice about that is if you look here, this first little box on the Brian layer has a V in it. That's for visibility. It's kind of like the eyeball in Photoshop. So I can hide or show the objects as need be. So within your scenes, there should be a layer for each object. So when you make an object, whatever it is, make sure you make a layer for it. Make sense? Okay. And what's nice about these layers is they actually travel with the objects. So when you bring them into other scenes, the layers will already be built and ready to rock and roll. So again, this will help you out tremendously with organizational capacities. And of course, it's something we grade on. So either you want to work better and smarter, or you just want a good grade. Either way, it's a good thing. Layers. Boop. All right, polygons. Let's talk a little bit about polygons. If we are going to be modeling with any given material or building anything with any given material, it's important that you understand that material. If we were working with clay, we would spend some time talking about clay and how it works in terms of keeping it moist so that you can still make changes to it, ideas of what happens as it starts to dry, firing the clay once we get the shape and form that we really want. So there's a lot of things we have to understand about how clay works. So let's talk a little bit about polygons, because that's what we're working with in this class. That is the material. Now, polygons, they go by many names. There's a lot of different terms for them, so it can get kind of confusing from time to time. But you will hear polygons as a term. You will hear geometry as a term. You will hear mesh as a term. And these are all terms to talk about a geometric construct within a computer created from a series of components. And in this instance, they all are really talking about the polygon or the polygon mesh. We often even refer to a single face of a polygon as a polygon, which only adds to the confusion. But these are all words that we use to talk about the polygon mesh or geometry. Now, in terms of polygon geometry, it actually comes in two modes. Some of you discovered it by accident last class, but we have object mode and we have component mode. And the way they work is much like, if you imagine me, I'm an object. I'm Steve. But I am also an object that is composed of many smaller objects. There are millions of cells that come together to make Steve. So you can either deal with me as a series of components, the little pieces that go together to make me up, or as a single entity, the culmination of all of those things. Polygon geometry works the same way. We have object mode, where we are dealing with the object, the sphere, the cube, the rhinoceros, whatever it is, and we have the components. Now the components consist of these smaller parts, vertices, edges, and faces. And the difference between them is this. Vertices are points in space that define shape. So the idea is it's a dot in space, and how you move that dot changes the shape of the object. Then we move on to edges. If you have at least two of these points, when we're talking about polygon objects, they're connected to each other with a straight line. That straight line is referred to as an edge. Now, if you have three or more edges, and they're connected to each other, Maya will shade in that surface. And that's where you have a face. So each component builds on the previous one in terms of their size. Let's take a look at how these guys work. All right, and I'm going to actually hide my grid so it's not so distracting. So I'm going to go to my show menu in my panel menu and click that, and the drop down lists everything that could be possibly seen in that particular view. And I'm going to uncheck the grid. So now the grid's not there. But you'll notice that the grid is in my other windows because they have their own show menu, and I didn't uncheck it there. I'm not deleting it, I'm hiding it. Yep, you just go to your show menu and click on it with the left mouse button, and then you'll see a listing of everything that could possibly be seen in that particular window. And you just click on with the left mouse button the thing you don't want to see, and grids towards the bottom. It's within your panel menu. If you look right here, do you see this window? That's where show is, right there. I'll come around and show you. Don't worry. We'll come back and show you where that is. So again, this is my polygon object, and you'll notice that when I select it, it turns green. This is an indication of object mode, right? The whole entity. I can also hover my cursor over the geometry and hold down the right mouse button. This gives me a circular menu set over a larger rectangular one. The circular menu set, this is where we list the components, the smaller pieces that go together to make the larger object. So if, for example, I want to see the vertices or vertexes for this object, I can choose vertex, again, by holding that right mouse button down and choose vertex. And now my object turns blue. This blue color is an indication of I'm in component mode now. And I know that I'm in component mode. Again, it's blue, and I see these little dots at the corners. These are the vertices. And in terms of their use, you can select vertices and then select your move tool. And then with the move tool selected, you can move the vertices, and this effectively changes the shape of the object. Now, in terms of the manipulation of and selection of vertices, you can select one vertice and hold Shift, which is add to selection. And you can select a second vertice and have vertices move together. And in terms of their behavior, you can move them, you can scale them, you can rotate them. All of these things help to change the shape of the object by the manipulation of the components. All right. Now, something very important to understand about selection. The selection process does not respect geometry. And what that means is, if I do a marquee selection, which is something we will do quite a bit, and that's where we hold down the left mouse button and create a selection area, we will select everything that is inside of that area when we let go. So I've grabbed all the vertices on top of this object. In fact, I can do a marquee selection and grab everything on the front as well as the back. So even components I can't see can be selected. So whether you can see them or not, and that's what I mean by selection does not respect geometry. Just because you can't see it visually doesn't mean you can't select it. Does that make sense? So just be careful when you're selecting. Make sure you're grabbing what you think you're grabbing. Make sense? Hell yeah? Hell yeah. Awesome. Incidentally, some of you might have been going, wait, what's this crazy mode here? 5 on your keyboard activates shaded mode in Maya, and that's where Maya kind of shades in your geometry so you can see it physically. And 4 on your keyboard activates wireframe mode. And wireframe mode is kind of like a 3D blueprint. 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded. All right, let's take a look at the next component. If I hold down my right mouse button and go straight up, I can choose edge mode. This will allow me to select the edges. And you'll notice those cute pinkish purple dots are gone. But now I can grab a whole edge. And I can do the same thing in terms of its manipulation. All right, again, between 2 points, only a straight line when we're talking about polygons. And you can move them, you can rotate them, and you can scale them. So whatever you need to do to change the shape. Now, largest component for polygon manipulation, hold down the right mouse button and go straight down to faces. Faces basically gives you the ability to select the entire face of an object. Again, you can move it, you can rotate it, you can scale it, all of which change the shape of the object. And in this instance, though, we're dealing with a face. Each component level gives you a larger amount of manipulation. Now, you might be wondering, well, why do I need these different component levels? Well, I could probably get away with 2. I don't really need all 3. And for that explanation, I like to talk about painting a room inside a house. How many of you guys have ever painted a room inside of a house? Okay, I hate that job. Moving, number 1. Painting, number 2. But in terms of painting, when I'm painting the wall, do I use like a little brush like this? No, what do I use? The big roller, right? I need that big roller because it slaps a lot of paint on the wall very quickly and very evenly so I can get done because I don't like painting, right? So I use a big roller. However, many walls have really nice molding at the bottom that separate the wall from the floor, whatever it happens to be, rug or what have you. Can I use the roller on the molding? If you taped it a lot, maybe. But if I use the roller on the molding, I'm going to get paint all over the place where I'm not supposed to have it, like on the rug, and get sent to the naughty corner. And honestly, the molding is typically a gloss anyway. You're usually doing a flat on the wall. But point being, I'm going to use a medium-sized brush to get that. I still have to tape it, but I need a medium-sized brush. Does that make sense? Now, when I'm trying to paint the windowsill, and I'm trying to keep the paint off of the glass, which I can tape, and I can take a razor blade to it even after that. But am I going to use a medium-sized brush for that? No, I'm going to use a really small brush for that. So sometimes you need very fine control and adjustment, and sometimes you need big adjustment. And that's why we have components of different levels as well. Because there's no way I'm going to take that little tiny brush and try to paint the walls with it, right? I'll go nuts. Yes, absolutely. Because sometimes you're trying to make a very small change to an object, so you use the vertices. Sometimes you're trying to make a big change to the object, and that's why you use the faces. Make sense? Awesome. So, different components, different levels of change to the object. All right, and again, as I said, in terms of a polygon object, between 2 points, there can only be a straight line. So if I've got 2 points, there can only be a straight line between them. And that's sort of a rule of polygons. And we'll talk about how do we make things look more curved. But first, an activity. I knew there would be rejoicing. You're like, that's enough talking, let me touch it. I got it. So let's do a little activity. Anytime you see me, Marcus, and Sarah there, you know we're going to be doing a little bit of an activity together. which means you need to set your project to what? The activity file folder. So make sure you A, launch Maya, always a good idea, and then B, set your project to the activity file folder. So here we go, let's go do that. And here's where we're really going to find out why it's important to set your project first. So if I go to File, Set Project, and I'm going to go to my activity file folder, I just have to select the outer folder and hit Set. And then I go to File, Open Scene, and I'm going to choose my, which one do I want? Oh, Edge Flow Activity. So choose the one called Edge Flow Activity. It's wherever you put that, because you downloaded it from FSO, so it should be somewhere on your computer. And I'll help you find it in a minute if you're not sure where it is. But you need to know where that folder is, and then you set your project to it. And then you want the Edge Flow Activity. All right, now, when the Edge Flow Activity pops up, you will see some brightly colored squares and a cute picture in the background. That's called an image plane. Those things are going to be really going to save our bacon, because they help a lot with the modeling process in terms of speed and accuracy. Now, if you opened up this file and you see a big pink box with a big pink X through it, you did not set your project properly. Maya cannot find the picture, and it didn't load it. So here's where you have to set your project again. File, Set Project, choose your activity file folder to set it, and then you have to open it again. Does that make sense? Maya's not going to go, oh, you set your project, now I can find the picture. You still have to open it also as a separate task. So once you got that open, you will see it should have this nice picture in the background. Now, the way this activity works is we are going to go to the upper left-hand corner here, and we're going to use actually our orthographic views, not our perspective view. Because when we're using image planes, we really work that from the orthographic views. So I'm going to go to my orthographic view and zoom in nice and close so that my geometry fills the frame. And what you will see is that there's sort of a drawing back here with dark lines on it. And then our geometry is this sort of green material over the top. And you'll notice that the lines or edges of our geometry do not match the drawing. Well, the way edges move across the surface of a piece of geometry is referred to as edge flow. How do the edges flow across the surface to describe shape and form? So right now, our edge flow does not match the illustration. So here's where I'm going to get into component manipulation in order to achieve that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover my cursor over the geometry and hold down the right mouse button, and I will see my components. If you hold down your right mouse button over the middle, the opening, the space, as it were, you will not get the components. It will be asking you about the image plane. So if you see that, that's because you're not over the geometry. So you literally have to be right on one of the lines or edges, hold down the right mouse button, and you'll see the components. So if you choose vertex, your geometry will turn light blue for component mode. And you can literally select a single vertex and using your move tool, move it into position. As you move your vertices into position, you will notice you are changing the edge flow of your geometry, because the vertices themselves do determine the edge flow in terms of their placement. So you can literally select and move the vertices and try to make them match the edge flow of the geometry. Now, there's a couple of different examples in here. I'd like you guys to try the first 3 of each of the rows. And Brian and I are going to walk around and make sure that you guys are on board with what's going on, help you out, and give you some advice and suggestions about how to keep moving forward. One of the biggest ones will always be write stuff down, because you can see this gets away from you quickly. You cannot just sit and listen. This is not that kind of school. This is not that kind of class. This is not that kind of material. You have to actively engage this stuff or it will get away from you quickly. Does that make sense? Okay. So in terms of these different things, again, I want you to try, well, just try the first two of these 4 rows here. Start in the upper left and work your way down. And when you get down towards the bottom here, which is sort of the more advanced stuff, what you'll notice is we are dealing with a 3D object. So what you're going to need to do is not only look at the edge flow asked for by the image, but take a good look at this 3/4 view down here, which shows you what we're looking for with depth information. So you can make a better adjustment to this edge flow in order to hit this shape and form. Does that make sense? Okay. Were there some questions? I thought I saw a couple. Yeah? What's that? It's called the edge flow activity. It's in your activity file folder. Okay, that's fine. That's why we're going to walk around. Brian and I are going to walk around and make sure everybody's on board. So we're going to get to your show menu question, and we are also going to get to your file activity file question. Okay? So as I said, Brian and I are going to walk around and answer questions as best we are able. If you're asking a question, good idea you write down the answer because I bet you're going to have that question again. So make sure you've got that information. You don't want to be without information because you can't move forward without it. Because it is literally collapsing. All right, let's see what we got. Yes. Oh, good. Yeah, no worries. I'm going to walk around. I'll be around. Yeah.
I don't know how to get rid of this.
I'm not really sure what you did there, but that's okay because it's not the end of the world. What I would do is launch Maya and let's get working on the activities and just ignore that for now.
Okay, it's just hard to use.
Yeah, again, I'm not sure what you did or how you did that, but I will take a look at it in a minute. Yep, no worries. Yes.
The wireframe and shaded mode.
Yes.
Does that affect the entire thing, or can you change it to just affect one?
Oh, it's by window by window. Yeah, it's not one object at a time, but you can have some objects in component mode and some objects not. In terms of wireframe or shaded, it's window wide. Does that make sense? But there are other things that you can do to do that kind of thing. What's that? It should be in the option of the tool. Double click on it. How you guys doing? Good? Terrific. Yay. And you can work with any component if you want to, vertices, edges, or faces to change edge flow. All right? Yep, put your cursor over whatever piece of geometry you want to manipulate. Oh, okay. Why don't you plug in your tablet and try to use that? Because really your touchpad is probably one of the worst ways to try to use this application. There you go. What's that?
How do I move this? Like, how would that?
Well, you basically move your pen, watch the cursor, and then click on whichever thing you want to work with. And then you have to use your right mouse button. You have to configure the pen. Did you do that yet? Oh, okay. All right. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, you have to configure the pen first because you got to turn this into basically a 3-button mouse. But what'll happen is then you'll be able to select and click on things. Good, good.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Because I didn't have a mouse, I just clicked this part of the pen.
Oh, okay. And it's working? All right. Try clicking the top part of that there. Is that allowing you to select? There you go. None of those buttons? Hmm. Very strange. Well, hang on one second. I'll see if Brian knows how to configure the pen. There you go. Right mouse button over the geometry. Right mouse.
Click the top, this part of your pen. Your neck. I'm really bad at that.
That's okay. No, it's frustrating because you're not familiar. Get the top part of the button.
Let's check if you're.
How you doing? You getting the components?
Yes.
Oh, good. All right. No worries. You just zoom in on it.
This is what happened.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. You're in your perspective view. Go to your front view. Yep. Now maximize that window by hitting the space bar. There you go. And then press 4 for wireframe. See? Yep. By hitting space bar while you're over that window. There you go. It is. If you hit space bar, you go to your 4 view. That's front view. Space bar again. There you go. Now select that. All right. Now if you press F, that will frame it for you. And 4 is wireframe. Good. Excellent. Make sure you're using your orthographic views to make changes. So go hit the space bar. Go to this view right there. And then hit space bar again. Now you're in that view. You want to work on that one. Yep. All right. You want to try to work in this view here, your orthographic views. So just put your cursor over that particular view and hit the space bar. Yep. Now, hit space bar again. Should be here. Try this. Click on this 4 view button there. Now go to this view and hit the space bar. All right. Now you want to be up over here. So just select that whole piece of geometry. There you go. Now press F and that will, whoops, that's okay. Select the piece of geometry and hit F. That will frame it. Now 4 is wireframe. There you go. All right. Now your show menu is right there. So whatever you could see in your scene, if you uncheck it, you can't see it. So right now you can see your grid, but if you uncheck grid, now you can't see the grid. Does that make sense? That's your show menu. Now, in terms of the activity file folder, did you download that from FSO?
I do.
Okay. So do you know where it is? Because that's the other thing, is you have to know where it's located.
No.
Okay, well, let's do this. Let's take a look in your downloads folder and see if that's where it is.
What downloads folder?
Okay, well, when you download files, where do they go on your computer?
Into my downloads.
Exactly. So if you downloaded those files, then that's where they should be unless you move them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So let's go look there. Open up your Finder. Let's go to your downloads. And let's see if your activity file folder is in there. Scroll down. Do you see one called activity files? Okay, so that's where your folder is. Grab that folder and just drag it to your desktop. Anywhere there's space. Any little open area. No, over here. There you go. Now, that's where it is. So now set your project to that folder. File, set project. All right. Now, if you choose your desktop, because that's where it is, scroll down. Desktop, activity files. Now hit set. Go ahead. Say create. Yeah, that's okay. Now go to File, Open Scene. All right. And let's go to, oh, actually that wasn't your activity file folder. Those are your level 1 assets. Do you know where your activity file folder is? It should be in the same place, actually. Let's go check your downloads again. And let's see, activity files. This one. Take that one and drag it to your desktop. Nope, try it again. Good. Now set your project to that. Close that window there. File, set project. All right. Activity files. Great. Now hit set. Now go to File, Open Scene. Great. Now choose Edge Flow Activity and hit Open. Don't save. Continue. OK. And then OK. Good. So now you have the right scene. So select that piece of geometry. Not the image, the geometry right here. Great. Now let's go to 4 View. And you see how it's right here? Now hit F for frame. And then hit the space bar and it'll make that window bigger. Don't hold the F down anymore. There you go. Perfect. Now if you hit 4 for wireframe. Do you see? Now you have to hold your right mouse button down to get into component mode and move those things around. Right mouse button, which is 2 fingers on the pad. Choose vertex. Vertex, 2 fingers again. 2 fingers. There you go. Choose vertex, which is right there. Now grab a vertex. Grab this guy right here. Click on it. And then using your move tool, move it. Make sense? And you want to move that dot so that these lines match up. So if you take this dot and put it right over there, go up a little. There. Do you see how the blue lines now match the black lines? That's the goal. Yep. That is correct. That is correct. So keep moving those things until they match. Yes.
And it loaded in as gray.
Yeah, that's okay. That'll still work. So what you want to do is go to your front view. Very good. Which one's front? Yep, this one. See, it says front there. This is your first piece of geometry. Now if you press F, that will frame it for you. And then what did we say was the difference between wireframe and shaded? There you go. Now, how do we get to component mode from object mode? Because right now you're in object mode. What was component mode?
That's kind of where I got lost. It was at that point.
Right mouse button over the geometry. Over here, right mouse button. And you should be able to do that with just your pen. You shouldn't have to put your fingers on the pad. Do you know which button gives you right mouse button on that? Okay. Oh, there you go. Choose vertex. And then grab a vertex. And using your move tool, move the vertex. Make sense? Yep. You want the black lines and the blue lines to be the same. Yep. You're supposed to grab the vertices and move them so that the edge flow of your geometry matches the drawing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, all the lines are, they don't look straight. They look in the pixelated.
But yeah, don't worry about that. You just want to move the vertices so that you're getting the major changes, because you can see where that black line like wiggles in and out. You want to match the edge flow of your geometry to that. Okay, you don't want to work in this view. You want to work in your front view. We work in our orthographics.
Right here?
That's how you get to all four. We want down here. So hit the space bar to maximize that one. Okay. Select this one because this is the first one. And actually, you know what? It looks like you moved some stuff around by accident.
Yeah.
Open this file again. Yeah, and don't save when it asks you. Edge flow activity. There you go. Don't save. Continue. Okay, great. Select that one. Press F to frame it. Now, how do we get to wireframe mode? Do you remember? What did we press for that?
Root 4?
4 was wireframe.
Yeah.
Now, you want to go to component mode. How do we get to that? Do you remember?
No, I don't know.
Right mouse button over the geometry. Yeah, it won't read through the gloves. There you go. And that's, you can use your pen for that, or you can hold 2 fingers on the tab, on the trackpad. All right, now try that again. But this time don't choose face mode, choose the vertex mode. 2 fingers
Oh, okay.
over the geometry. Hold on. Try again. No, I missed. There you go.
Oh, okay.
Vertex. Now, grab the vertex and using the move tool, move it. Grab the vertex. All right, and then you can move it. So the goal is to move the blue lines so they match the black lines. Yep, you're welcome. How's it going? Which one you working on? Did you do the one on the top and left first? There you go. Start up here. They're easier at the top and to the left, and they get harder as you go down. So you want to start working with that one. Good. There you go. Go to your components. Choose vertex. And then using your move tool, which you have selected, select the vertices and move them around. And what you want to do is make the blue lines match the black lines. How's it going? Good. That's fine. If you press 4, there'll be different colors. You want to go to your orthographic views because we work from like the front and the side when we're using image planes. 4 view, front. See how it says front? You want to be in there. So hit space bar to maximize that window. This is the first one we're going to work on. Select it. Select that. Now press F to frame it. Great. Now, how do we get to wireframe mode? Four on your keyboard. All right. Now, how do we get to component mode? 5 is shaded mode. Yep. Component mode. We hold down our cursor over the right with the right mouse button. Right mouse button. Choose vertex. Now you want to grab a vertice, and with your move tool selected, move it. That's correct. See? Yep. How's it going?
I'm still having that problem. I can't figure out how to get to vertices.
Well, if you have to use your trackpad, until you get your pen configured, hold down the right mouse button, which is 2 fingers on the trackpad. Hold it down. Choose vertex. All right, now you can grab vertices. Yeah, do it again. 2 fingers, choose vertex. Now it's blue. So if you grab a vertice and then use your move tool, move the edge, or move the vertice, and that moves the edges. How's it going? Making some progress? Oh, good. Excellent. Yes. Oh, you don't even have to save these. This is just for you for practice. Yep. But make sure you're working in your orthographic views when you're making adjustments to geometry. So you want to be in front or side or top. That's correct. Yeah, you want to be over here using that one. Mm-hmm. Look right here. What's that? Hang on 1 second. I'm helping her. I'll come right over there. Select the vertices. All right. Now press F to frame it. All right. Now zoom out a little bit. Now hit spacebar to maximize that window. Now, how do we get to wireframe? Remember 4 is wireframe. There. So now you can move the components to match the edge flow. You're welcome. Yes.
It's not letting me select my things.
Well, you have to hold down the right mouse button to get to component mode first.
Right, I'm doing that in it.
Yep, but that's not, you're not over the geometry. You got to be right on the line, because right now it's asking you about the image planes. There you go. Do you see how the image plane is selected?
Oh.
Click off in space. Now come over here. Right mouse button. Right over the line. No. You're still over the image plane. And you still have the image plane selected. You don't have to necessarily zoom in more. Go ahead and zoom back out again. You just have to make sure you're not selecting the image plane. There you go. Here, let me see 1 second.
This is gonna kill me.
No, it's not. But you're gonna have to work.
Yeah.
This is obviously very hard without a mouse. There you go.
I'm not doing exactly what you just reminded me I could do.
Vertex. Grab the vertex, use your move tool, and move it.
Thank you.
Alrighty, you're welcome. Sure, hang on 1 second.
I just want to make sure. Did you say you wanted us to do like 3 and then
Just do the first 2 and keep going down. Yep.
So she showed me what you did with this video.
Excellent.
And now how do I reset this?
Oh, you know what? Open the file again, but don't save it because you changed the size of something there. So if you just open the file again, and it'll say, do you want to save this? And you say no, and then you get a fresh start. All right, guys, so it seems like you guys are starting to do pretty well with this. What I'm hoping you are seeing is that if you are missing a single step from these processes when I give them to you, you're completely dead in the water. You guys seeing that? This is not really a I got the gist of it kind of line of work. You know what I mean? You really have to have every step. And that's why I detail them out for you. So make sure that when I'm giving you a set of instructions, you're jotting that stuff down, because I guarantee you, you will not remember all this stuff. And again, that's not a challenge. I'm not challenging your intelligence or anything like that, your creativity. It has nothing to do with that. If there are 47 extremely specific steps for you to take and you're missing one of them, you just stop working because you can't go forward anymore. Does that make sense? You've got to jot this stuff down. I wish there was another way. There's not. You've got to jot it down, and then through practice and repetition, you will start to remember these things because you're doing them all the time. But you really need to get dialed in order to be able to start making progress forward. Otherwise, this is so frustrating. So make sure that you are writing down the stuff that I give you guys, specifically when I give you, like, make sure you do this, do this, do this. You need that stuff. You can't move forward. I mean, we're just at day 2. Does that make sense? And by the way, if you think this gets easier, you're crazy. It's not. It gets only more complicated. So you've got to keep up, or it will snowball on you very quickly. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, if you didn't understand what I had to say, if you need me to say something again, if you need me to say something in another way, I am so fine with that. I have no problem with that whatsoever. Does that make sense? We move at your speed as quickly as we can, but at your speed. So point being, if you're having trouble, ask a question. You really need to do that. Does that make sense? It's crazy to do otherwise. You are here to learn, and it's my job to teach you. So if I have to do it a different way, I'm going to do that. If we need to cover something again, I'm going to do that. And I guarantee you, if you have a question, there's at least 5 other people with that exact same question, and they're going to be so happy you asked, because then they don't have to. Does that make sense? So be hero, ask a question, because that's what we need to do. All right. So this activity, as with all the activities we do, are here to make you better at this. So if you feel like, hey, I was just kind of getting the gist of this, and now we got to change gears and go back to more information, guess what? You guys own these activities. You can open them up in lab, you can open them up at home, and you can practice as many times as you want until you feel more comfortable with what you're doing. Does that make sense? Just don't save it. You can keep opening this file brand new every time. Practice, practice, practice. And again, the good news is, like anything else in life, if you practice, you get good. You can't avoid it. You know, some people will get good faster than others. We can't do anything about that. The only variable is how badly do you want to learn this? Because the people who do the best are the ones that try the hardest. And I don't mean trying harder than you've tried before. I mean trying really hard, regardless of your personal parameters. You got to decide if this is what you want to do and then commit to it. Does that make sense? Okay, because I know it's hard. Believe me, I came from the same place as you. When I first started learning how to use Maya, I knew how to use like Microsoft Word and Excel somewhat. And let me tell you, learning how to use Maya kicked my bottom badly. I remember there was a day I was so frustrated, I grabbed my monitor with both hands and I headbutted the screen. And that was when we had glass monitors, to give you a time frame on when I learned how to use Maya. But I was so frustrated. So believe me, do I know your frustration? Yeah. Have I been there? Definitely. Do I still go there on occasion? Sure. When we learn something new, that's going to happen. But the keys are dialing into the information, write down as much as you can, ask a lot of questions, and practice. Luckily, that's all it is. You know, if it was something else, you know, it's not like basketball. It's helpful if you're really tall. You know, this is anybody who wants it can do it. But the variable is how badly do you want it? All right, so I'm just letting you know, this is the way it goes down, and practice is the key. So please do that. Practice, practice. All right, so let's get into some more material here. As always, we're going to have more activities, and I know it's a bummer to have to get away from Maya for a little while, but we will be back, I promise. All right, let's talk a little bit about modeling and getting started with the modeling process. We're going to talk about what we call the blockout or primitive build. And the blockout or primitive build is just a way of sort of starting to establish the shape and the form of the object on a very primitive level so that we can start to see how these pieces come together. And again, it gives us a great idea of proportion and scale. And the idea of the primitive build and the blockout is the very simple idea that even with a few very simple pieces, we can build much more complex objects, because complex objects are made up of many smaller, more simple objects. So even with just a few simple objects and a few simple shapes, we can put these things together and make whole objects that are more complicated. So with that in mind, the blockout or primitive build is just sort of a step between modeling and what we were doing with Mr. Potato Head. We're recognizing shape and form, which is aspects of modeling, but we're also just using the tools in the toolbox and getting more familiar with how this stuff works. And what we do is we create simple shapes and try to fill the form of a particular object. So for example, I've got this really funky pepper mill. So what I did was I created some simple polygon primitives. You know, this is a cylinder, I just squashed it flat. This is another cylinder. This is another cylinder. This is a sphere, but I squashed it a little bit. Here's some more cylinders. There's another sphere. This sphere I kind of stretched out a little bit. So you can see that within the detail of this object, it's really composed of a bunch of simple shapes. Kind of like the idea of as if I was going to draw this object, what would I start with my simple volumes to occupy shape and form? So with that in mind, we're going to do another fun little activity where we're going to be blocking out some objects. So I've got a scene that I made for you. Guess which folder it's in? Activity file folder. And I've given you these really interesting silhouettes, and you're going to match those silhouettes using simple primitives. And I'll do the first one for you so you can see how it goes down. And then from there, you guys can work on them. So let's take a look at the blockout activity. And the good news is if you set your project to the activity file folder, it's still set to that. I don't have to set it again, but if you wanted to, you could. File, set project, choose your activity files. And this time we're going to open up our which one is it? I think it's a blockout. Yeah, I think that's what I call it. I don't know. I keep changing the names of these files, and it confuses mostly me. So I've given you this one view up here, which you may or may not see on your copy of Maya, but this just kind of gives you an idea of where these objects are oriented. It gives you a little bit of a 3/4 view so you can kind of see what they are. They are a pencil, a chair, a mailbox, and a lamp. So I've got a front view and a side view of them here. And of course, when we're modeling and we're using image planes, we really rely on our orthographic views, not perspective. That's just kind of where we look at the object as a whole. So here's where we're really kind of lining stuff up. So in terms of the procedure, again, it's going to be just like the moving of the components. So I'm looking at this thing, it's a pencil. If I was going to draw this pencil, it's very similar to the ideology for how I would model this pencil. So if I'm going to draw a pencil, what primitive shape do I start with? A cylinder, right? So if I'm going to model a pencil, also cylinder. So I look up here on my polygon tab and I'll see, oh, I've got a cylinder here. So I click on it and it makes a cylinder. And I'm going to use my move tool and I'm going to position it in the vicinity of my pencil. Now, in terms of the size, it's completely wrong, so I need to scale it. So I go to my scale tool. Now, something to be aware of, I can scale and make the cylinder the same width as my pencil. But if you look in my perspective view, what I did, is that the shape of pencils? That's the shape of the eraser. So in terms of the shape change, you can see when I scaled just using the x-axis, all I did was sort of squash it thin, right? So even though it looked right here, it doesn't look right out here. So what I want to do is make sure that I scale using the cube in the center, which maintains proportion of the whole object. And I'm going to scale that down and make it match. And I'll let you watch that happen over here. You can see it maintains its proportion when I scale it. Now, in terms of making adjustments to objects, it's true, sometimes it's kind of hard to see the image behind the geometry. So some people will work in wireframe mode, which is what key? 4. Some people can work in shaded mode, which is 5. But for me personally, I like to see the geometry and the image plane behind. So what I utilize is if I go to my panel menu here, I go to shading and I choose X-ray as my option. And what that allows me to do is see both the geometry as well as the image behind. So this is very handy. So I can line up my geometry, and it's not long enough, so I'm going to go to my scale tool again, and I'm just going to make it a little bit longer so that it occupies the simple shape and form of the pencil. Make sure it looks good in my front view. Then I'm going to go to my side view, and I look at this and I'm like, oh wait, it's not even over my pencil. So I need to move my pencil so that it lines up in both views. Right? And when it looks good in my side view and it looks good in my front view, then I know it's good. And I'm using these two different views as a cross-reference to make sure things are matching. Yes? Under shading, you want X-ray mode. X-ray. Thank you for asking. All right. So now I've got this first piece in here. Now, in terms of my pencil, the next biggest detail is this sort of metal collar. And that's what sort of crimps the eraser against the wooden part of the pencil. Now, this collar here, again, if I look at both images, I can see they look identical, so it's pretty much symmetrical all the way around. What shape do you think I would use to make that colander? Probably another cylinder, right? Now I could make another one by just clicking on cylinder and then bringing it over and then lining it up just as I did before. But I've already got a cylinder right here and it's pretty close to the right size already. So why not duplicate this one, right? So I'm going to select the geometry and go to Edit, Duplicate, and this will give me a second cylinder. Now, you wouldn't know there's a second cylinder there. It's somewhat deceptive because you can't see the second cylinder. They're right on top of each other. So if I move this, you'll see, oh yeah, there are in fact two. So just be aware, when you duplicate something, the duplicate is right on top of the original. So now I've got this second cylinder, but it's obviously way too long. So I'm going to scale it in Y just to shrink it down. Why? Because it's too long. And I'm going to move it into position. And again, I'm just using my move tools. I haven't gone into anything we haven't already played with. Again, I'm going to scale from the middle when I want it to maintain proportion. And then I'm just going to scale it in Y to make it match there. All right. When it looks good in this view, I'm going to check my other view and make sure that that's looking good, because sometimes your views don't line up perfectly. In fact, more often than not, your views don't line up perfectly. So just be aware, very, very rarely will your image planes be exact, perfect matches to each other. So it may be off a tiny bit. So just be aware that that's something you have to deal with. But we're always looking at one view and then looking at the other view and making sure that it looks good in both. And if it looks good in both, then we can progress to the next adjustment. Yes? Well, we didn't even get into that yet. Yes? That's correct. The components help it to achieve its shape and form, but we refer to the entire entity as a piece of geometry, a mesh, or a polygon object. Does that make sense? That's a great question. Yep. And eventually we will get into the tools you're talking about. Next class. select the object in object mode, and go to Edit, Duplicate. Yep, absolutely. Terrific. See how that works? You ask me a question, I tell you again, and now you got it. Oh yeah, we'll get into hotkeys. That's lesson 6, I think. All right, so now I've got this in here. So now the next biggest piece that I need to replicate is the eraser, right? If I was going to draw the eraser, what would I start with? Another cylinder, right? So if I'm going to model it, I'm also going to make a cylinder. Again, I could just create another cylinder here, or duplicate this one, right? Because I've already got a cylinder in the neighborhood, and it's pretty close to the size I want anyway. So again, select it, edit, duplicate, and this will give me another cylinder. And this one, and I'm going to go to my shading mode and choose X-ray so I can see through it a little bit better. And scale from the middle. Move it up. Looks good here. Let me check my other view. Looks good here. So if it looks good in both of those, I know I'm probably doing pretty well out here in my 3D view, because this represents the culmination of what the other two views are seeing. All right. So now I go back to my pencil, and the last little bit of detail I've got left is the tip, right? So which of my polygon primitive friends is the closest to the tip of a pencil? Cone, right? So I choose cone. Put on my blue suede shoes and a different cone. All right, so here's my cone. I'm going to flip it over 180 degrees. And then I'm going to scale it. Move it into position. All right, looks good in this view. Let me see this view. Oh, it's not even close. It's way the heck over here. Let me just drag that back over to here where it should be. Line it up. And if it looks good in my front view and it looks good in my side view, then I know I'm pretty close here in my perspective view. So again, all those views work together towards the same thing. Make this thing look right. All right. Now, in terms of these objects, you can see there's 4 of them. They get more complex as they go. We got a chair, a mailbox, and a lamp. So what I'd like you to do is try to build these guys for a little bit. We're going to walk around as we did before, and try to look over your shoulder and help you out with what you need help with. A couple of suggestions for you. In terms of the chair, if you make one leg, you can then duplicate that to make the leg on the other side. And then you can select both of those and duplicate them at the same time and move that and do the legs in the back. So you only have to make one to get all 4. This is a mailbox, just to help you out with shape and form. And you'll do the legs in much the same way. This last object is a lamp, and it is composed of cylinders and spheres. So just think about that when you're trying to figure out shape and form and you're making the adjustments appropriately to those. And again, this view might not necessarily be functional on your copy of Maya, because I've seen sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But really the more critical ones are obviously your orthographic views. And if you should happen to accidentally move your orthographic view, don't worry, just open the file again and it'll be back in position. As long as you don't save it, everything will go back to the way it was at the start and you can try it again. All righty? Any quick questions before we delve into this one? Under shading, X-ray. And what you'll notice is that each window has its own shading menu and its own X-ray. So you can have some windows in X-ray and some not. So if you really want that, you can put it in the windows you need only, or all of them if you want. Your call. All right, so Brian and I will walk around, see how we're doing with this one, and hopefully we'll be making some good progress. Yes? If you press F for frame, That'll bring it right front and center for you.
Oh, okay. Then I'll make it first. So, I wanted to. I'm only going to zoom in. But I just want to say I want to move over.
Well, that's what you need to use your mouse or your pen tablet with, because you're going to be using different button combinations of Option with right, left, and center mouse. Option with right, left, and center. Yep. Yeah, you got to get used to it, and that's why we have all these crazy activities, because this is very much a touch related application. You have to learn it, the feel, the touch, and then by doing it, you learn it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the tablet is the more ergonomically sound way to go about it, but I learned on a mouse, so I can't get away from it as much as I try. But when I'm painting textures, I use a pen. So.
Are you sure you're touching the thing?
I am touching the phone, at least. It's not letting me elongate it.
Oh, well, you want to use your scale tool, which you're on. But here's the thing: it looks like you're not manipulating the cubes itself. You're grabbing sort of the bar there. If you use your plus and minus, you can change the size of that tool. So if you go minus, it will get smaller. There we go. Now grab the cube and do it.
So to make sure that, that all these are good, I have to check all these to make sure.
Yeah, check this view and this view, and when they line up in both, you're good.
Oh, so just use these two.
That's correct.
The front and the side to
That's correct.
line it up, and
so
then
you
it
can
should
see
be fine over here.
that's correct, because it's lined up here, but it's not lined up there. So if you move that into place, you got it. Yep. Good.
So,
Yes.
how can I find it in this window?
Well, you made the pencil, but you only used that view.
No, it's in this one too.
Oh, it's in that one too?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So yeah, what you want to do is go over here and go to panels and choose perspective. Perspective. There you go. Now zoom out. Oh, that's interesting. It somehow flipped. Okay, let's do this. Go to panels, perspective, new. All right.
Oh, there it is.
There it is. Yep, no worries. Yeah, I'm not sure why that happened, but that's okay. More than one way to skin a cat. Oh, nice. Good. Awesome. Yeah. Oh, do this. Go to panels, perspective, and choose perspective. Okay, let's do this. Go to panels, perspective, and choose new. There it is right there. Yep, you got it. Very good. All right. Very good. Make sure you're working in your orthographic views. Front and side. Go to your 4 view. You want to work in these guys, because that's how you can line stuff up. Perspective is really just kind of looking at it overall. What's that?
Sorry, I was really late.
Mm-hmm.
We were using design too.
Yep. Yep, those are the simple polygon primitives. Well, when you're looking at the object, you have to look at what it's, if you were going to draw it, like if you're going to draw that pencil, you would start with a cylinder. So when you're going to model it, you start with a cylinder too. You want to use the same object. But what I would recommend very highly is you watch the recording of this lecture, because, you know, you can't come in the fourth quarter and expect to know what's going on. Right. Okay. Well, make no worries, but watch the lecture because the information is the part that I'm the most worried about. Yes.
Oh, whenever I try to select my object, it's always selecting the image.
Okay. Let me see you do it. Let me see if I can see. Go ahead. Click off into space. All right. Now, what are you trying to?
Yeah, I can click this here.
Right. Okay, but is there any geometry there or no? Because I don't see any.
It's because it's an X-ray.
Oh, okay. Okay. So select that. Click off into space. And let me see, select that. Click that third box over there. You created a layer for that thing? Now try to select it. Yep. What you did was you created a layer for it, and then you made it a reference. And when you make something a reference, you can't click on it. Does that make sense? It kind of makes it bulletproof, so you can't mess with it. So I'm not sure what button combination you pressed to make that happen, but that's what happened. But you're okay. No, it's okay. It works just fine. Yes.
So I have these lined up in this view, but they're not lining up in like the orthographic view. Like how?
Well, as long as they line up both here and here, you're going to be okay.
How do I see like where to put the other two legs?
Well, if you build both of the legs in this view, right, and you duplicate them, then all you have to do is move them back, and you got to look at the other view to figure out that, like, these two are like next to each other there. So if you grab them both and duplicate them, you just slide them to there. Does that make sense? It's kind of crazy, but you have to sort of think in 3D, if that makes sense at all. You have to imagine it in 3D space.
This is totally a crappy question, but would you happen to have like an extra like a USB adapter? If not, it's totally fine. I'm just asking to see.
Yeah, no, sorry, I don't.
That's okay.
Yeah, no worries. That's a fair question, but I don't have. I used to have an extra mouse, but a student borrowed it and I never got it back. It happens. If you click on this icon here, yep, that one. That's the channel box.
Okay.
And then you can look at your rotate values, and you could literally plug it straight in. Yep, you're welcome. Yes. It's okay.
To the side, but they're both on negative Z. How do I switch that?
Oh, well, we can make another one.
Oh.
Go to panels, orthographic, and let's do a new side.
I thought I did that right there, but it was still the same.
Yeah.
So,
Let's see what happens. Choose
you want to do
side.
side.
Yeah.
Wait, right or left?
It doesn't matter as long as it's a different one.
That's what I wanted.
There you go. That should work. Let me know if it doesn't. Oh yeah, you're going through the image plane. That's why.
So do I need to do?
So like as you're approaching, you can see it, and then as soon as you go through it, it's on the other side. So yeah, make another one. Yep.
To right instead.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Geometry in front.
There we go.
Yep. No worries. Good you figured that out, though. Yeah.
Extra shading area again?
Oh, if you want to see through it, shading is X-ray. Mm-hmm. And you want to flip it over with rotate.
Right, yeah.
So go to your rotate tool. There you go. and then rotate it on the Z-axis. Got it. Yes, sure.
How do you fill in the cylinder once you've created it?
If you press 5, that's shaded mode, and 4 is wireframe. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, you might want to jot that one down. It comes up a lot. Alrighty, gang. So we've been doing pretty well with this. It looks like we're starting to get the hang of it. Again, like any exercise you do in this class, if you do it again and again, you're going to get better. I recommend very highly you practice this stuff. Practice it in the lab, practice it at home. As I've said, 2 hours every night is my recommendation beyond class time. You've got to practice this stuff. It's not one of those things where once you leave the classroom, you can forget about it. This is immersive study. So you kind of have to live it and breathe it on a daily basis in order to make the most out of the time you have. So let's take a look at the next step, which is if I'm trying to block out an object, it's going to be very much like what we did just now with the pencil and the chair and all that stuff. What we're going to do is we're going to block out a simple object. And this is the way you guys will go through the process of when we get to modeling, which we'll talk about next class. This is the process that you will go through when it comes to start trying to build assets. So make sure you're taking note of what we're doing and how it works. Now, this is a skill check, which means that the file you will need to do it is in your skill check file folder. So we have Gesundheit. We have activity file folders, and that's the stuff we do together in class during lecture. We have the skill check folder, which is the folder of stuff that you work on at home or in lab, your call. But that's how we reinforce everything we did on any given day. And then we have our asset file folders, which are the level 1, level 2, and level 3 assets that you're going to build. So since this is a skill check, we're going to go to our skill check folder for that. So that means I'm going to have to set my project to my skill check folder. Does that make sense? Because I'm changing gears. I'm not doing an activity anymore. Now I'm doing my skill check. So in order to do that, we are going to set our project, file, set project, and this time I'm going to use my skill check file folder, which is again a file folder you should have downloaded from FSL. And I hit set. Now I go to File, Open Scene. And you will see I have a file called jar asset start. And the jar is pretty much the object that we play with a lot to kind of learn how things work. It's not an asset you can turn in for anything other than a skill check. So you can't turn that in as a modeled asset. It can't show up in any of your weekly turn-ins. It is strictly a skill check item. And the reason we have it there is because it's a pretty easy item to build. And you'll become very familiar with it because we're going to learn all kinds of new processes on this very same piece. So for this first one, this skill check, we're just blocking out this object. And again, it's more of the stuff we were just doing. So I've got this jar, and I can see in terms of its detail that it's pretty much a cylinder, right? And it's got sort of this sort of ribbed element to it here. There's sort of a little bulge here on the neck. And then you can see at the top, it kind of flares out a little bit here. And again, it's identical on both sides. So in terms of if I was going to draw this jar, I would start with a cylinder. So when I'm going to model it, I do the same thing. So I create a cylinder. And then I move it into position. It's a little bit too small. So of course I'm going to scale it, and I'm going to scale from the middle because I want it to stay cylindrical in shape. So I can make it bigger. Move it in so it lines up. Line it up with the bottom there. And again, I like to be able to see through my geometry to the image behind. What setting do I use for that? Wireframe, or I can go to shading and choose X-ray. And again, it's either one. It's a personal preference. So I line up that cylinder in this view. I go to this view and I see, oh, it's actually a little bit off there. So set it to X-ray and line it up as well. And again, when it looks good here and it looks good here, I know I'm good to go. Now I need to make it taller because it's not quite tall enough. So I'm just going to scale it a little bit, move it into place. And again, we're always sort of manipulating and adjusting our objects to get them to line up as best we are able. And again, you realize that image planes are not perfect, nor are the people who set them up. So you just got to do your best to find something that works. All right. Now, the next biggest detail here is this sort of flared out top of my cylinder. And again, in terms of what I've got to work with, the cone is the closest to what I'm looking at. So I create a cone. And I'm going to need to flip it over. I like that cologne. It drives me wild. Here we go. I'm going to scale it and make it bigger. Move it down into place. Get that bad boy in there. Scale it up, move it in. And again, this is part of that block out or primitive build process, which is not necessarily modeling, but it is very similar to the starting steps of modeling, where we block some objects out. We'll talk more about how that works. And if I line it up in this view and I line it up in this view, then I know I'm going down the right path in terms of this view. All right. So now the last little detail in here is this sort of rib thing here, this bulge. So in terms of making that detail, I could use a sphere and you know, obviously make it bigger and then squash it down, and that would give me kind of that detail. But to be honest, the thing that's the closest is the donut or the torus.
Yeah.
If I make that guy, it's much more similar to what I'm going for. And I can put that into place and then squash it down. And it actually fits quite nicely. Line it up here, come over here and see. No, need to scoot it over this way a little bit. So when it looks good here and it looks good here, I know I got it going on in perspective. So once I get all that together, oh, okay, now it's starting to look like what it's supposed to look like. Now, once I'm done, then we go into the next step, whereas we try to save this file. Because ultimately, skill checks you do have to save because you've got to turn them in. Make sure you're taking note of when your skill check due dates are, because we have your skill checks turned in before your weekly assignment. And again, as I said before, these skill checks are worth 1% for each one you do. So if you do all 10 of them, you can up your grade by a full letter. So it's well worth it to do these things on a number of different levels. But so I've got this thing in place. It's looking pretty good. Now it's time for me to save the file. So in terms of saving the file, something that I've noticed, if you take a look, it'll tell you what kind of file you started with. All right? And you'll notice that this is a file called MA, Maya ASCII. Well, Maya files actually come in two flavors, Maya ASCII and Maya binary. They're like chocolate and vanilla. They're two flavors of ice cream. They're both Maya files. It doesn't make any difference. But they are slightly different in terms of how the file is recorded. A Maya binary file is a file that is written in computer language. It's all ones and zeros, and it makes no sense to us whatsoever. A Maya ASCII file is actually a file that is written in English. Like if you open a Maya file as a text document, if for those of you who understand programming, the language is very similar to C++. So you'll see a lot of the same verbiage and syntax running through it from there. The Maya ASCII file is a little bit bigger file because it is in English, you know, sentences and words and so forth, versus ones and zeros, which are more efficient. no one file is better than the other. I like the Maya ASCII files because if I need to, I can go in there and make adjustments to the scripting as far as the different files and how they work. But it doesn't make any difference which you save it at, except if Maya's not allowing you to save, because sometimes that happens with Maya 2016, 2017, and I'm not sure if that happens in 18 or not. But something to be aware of, if the original file is a .ma file, you're going to need to save the new one, your version of it, also as an MA. So make sure you save it as the same file type, and then you won't run into that problem. So if it's not letting you save and it's giving you an error, then you know when it's time to save, make sure you match the file type of the original. So you just go to File, Save Scene As, and then here's where you would name it. And again, the naming convention, Gold_Steve _ this is Skill Check Lecture 2 _3DF _1801 if you're in the January class of the new year. And again, down here is where you choose, is it an ASCII or a binary? And so since the original is an ASCII, I want to make sure that I make the new one an ASCII as well. And you just hit save. Now, since I set my project to my skill check file folder, because that's where all my skill checks are, where do you think this file is going to be saved? It's in the skill check file folder. It's in with the rest of them. Does that make sense? That's why it's important to know where your project is set, because that's where your files are going when you start saving stuff. Does that make sense? So keep track of that, because there's nothing more frustrating than where's my stuff? You know, that's the worst. It's 11:59, where's my stuff? So that gets super frustrating. So make sure you've set your project, you know where your files are, save it by the same type as the original, and you will have no trouble in that category at all. Now, in terms of the submission process, again, if you go onto FSO, there's literally an instructional, hey, do this, do this, do this, that explains exactly what you need to do to turn this file in after you've saved it. Does that make sense? And in terms of the technical parameters, the skill checks, we're not looking for a whole lot outside of the skills specifically, but other files that you turn in, meaning your weekly turn-ins, there are technical things that we're looking for. And that's where you have to make sure you're looking at the self-grade document, because that lists for you exactly what we're looking for. So when you're doing your weekly turn-in, make sure you're paying very close attention to the skill check document for that week. And I've made a little video for you for each week. It's called weekly turn-in procedure. It's like week 1 turn-in procedure, week 2 turn-in procedure. And literally it's a video that walks you through and talks about exactly how to submit your stuff. So the first one, I apologize, it's like 20 minutes long. I didn't want it to be that long, but I literally spelled everything out step by step. So if I could make you watch it, like put toothpicks in your eyelids, I would. You need to watch that video, because if you want to get the best possible grade, that's how you do it. Does that make sense? So make sure you're looking at those videos, and they're in, you know, again, on FSO, if you go to the activity itself, you know, your week 1 turn-in, right up towards the top, that's where you'll see that little video for you to download and watch. And that sort of basically covers everything you need to do. So make sure you take a look at that. I mean, other than the actual work, I don't go into, well, this is how you model an object. You know, that's the stuff that you do. But once you've completed that and you're like, okay, now I'm ready to start turning stuff in, what do I do? So definitely make sure you're watching that video. Take notes if you need to. Make sure you are familiar with what we're looking for. Again, the self-grade document is a great reinforcement to that. And just personal advice, me to you, don't wait till 11:59 to upload your assignments. That is the worst time to upload your assignments, because you're all panicky, it's late, you got 1 minute to get it to upload, and that's when the problems always happen. My personal recommendation, at 11 o'clock, stop working. Just stop. Start saving stuff, start naming files, figure out the turn-in procedure, and then turn in all of your work after you've looked at the self-grade document, because sometimes that upload process can take like a half hour, 40 minutes. So you don't want stuff that's coming in after the deadline, because you won't be able to upload it. Does that make sense? So exactly, you end up with zeros, and that's the worst. So at 11 o'clock at the latest, stop working. Because I have to be honest with you, I have graded assignments that are finished at 11:59, and they're usually terrible. So if you're working to right at 11:59, that's a warning sign. You need to start earlier. But 11 o'clock, just save it up, start going over what we're looking for, make sure it adheres to the technical specifications. Because if you recall, 2/3 of your grade are the technical and organizational capacities, right? So if you're ignoring those, you're looking at not such a great grade. You're better off hitting the technicals and keeping yourself out of trouble than making it beautiful and working up to the very last second. Does that make sense? Because that's only 30% of your grade. So you got to be smart. What are they looking for? And do that. Make sense? Hell yeah? Awesome. Okay, so again, don't forget about that online help session tomorrow. That's going to be really handy for you. Everybody benefits from those. They're terrific. Yeah, go ahead.
With making these objects, is there a way to keep adding more polygons than it is to just add more edge loops and build it off of one city?
Well, we're talking about two different things. First, we're talking about a block out, which is what we're doing right now, which is just creating simple primitive shapes and just trying to occupy shape and form. We're learning navigation within the interface and the use of the tools in the toolbox. Next class, we get into actual creation of components, which is where we get into creating edge loops, using insert edge loop, multi-cut, and tools like that in order to actually start modeling. But at this stage, we're just trying to get our feet wet and get used to the idea of shape and form and trying to get basically Maya to move with some relative ease before we start getting into some really challenging tools. But yes, for this class, no worries. Yeah. This particular assignment, we're just moving shapes around, but next class we start modeling, so don't worry. We will get into that because I know you're anxious too. Go ahead. If you select them in object mode and hit delete, they're gone. Yep, just select them in object mode and delete. Alrighty guys, so next up is lab. So like I said, make sure you're getting some help in the lab, talk to the instructors, show them your work. That's really the smartest thing you can do. If you're working a little bit ahead and you're watching lectures in advance, great. Do the activities, great. Do the skill checks and then show them to us. Anything that you're going to turn in, show it to us before you turn it in because we can give you advice on how to do better. And I know you might be thinking, oh, that sounds like you're going to make me do more work. Well, maybe, yeah, but it's going to improve your grade and your knowledge and understanding of this material. So you want that, believe me, more than anything, you want that information as much as you can get. So feedback is huge. So come see us and we will tell you what you need to do better, always. And very few classes will let you show them your work before you turn it in. So it's almost like a pre-grade. I'll tell you what you need to fix. Right? You're missing this, this, and this. You do that, you're gonna get those points. You know, and who doesn't want a good grade? So show us your work often. And that includes my digital friends too. Bring it to the Hangout and show it to Marcus or Brian or me, and we will definitely take a look at it there before the turn-in. Yes? Okay, I'll come back and take a look. But anyway, that's it I want to talk about today. Thank you very much, guys. I will see you on Tuesday for sure, and we will start off with modeling and using some what I call the big three tools, which is going to be a lot of fun because that's where we're going to be able to start creating our own components and making some real good shape change to the objects. That will be lecture 3, yes, on Tuesday. Oh, cool. Yeah, if you want to watch lecture 3 in advance, and that's what I was saying last class, watch it. Absolutely. Watch the lecture, do the activities that go with it, because they're all there, you know what I mean? And then try to do the skill checks and bring it to me. Let me see. Absolutely. All right, so I'll see you guys on Tuesday. Thank you very much. I hope you learned a lot and had some fun. Let's do it again. All right.
Every time I do the blockout props, skill check, it keeps giving me this.
Yes, that is the blockout skill check. That's the one you want. Which file did you want to open?
The blockout skill check project.
Oh, the skill check. Well, here's where you have to change the file you're looking at. Because here, close that for me. right now you're in the activity file folder, right? That's not where that is. The skill check files are in the skill check file folder.
Right.
So what you have to do is close this, and now you have to set your project to the skill checks. So file, set project. All right, now where's your skill checks? Skill check. So choose that one, and then hit set. Now go to File, Open Scene. And now you want your jar asset start. Open. See? Now you're on that. Make sense? All right. That's the one you're going to block out. Thank you, Brian. Yes, no, that's the way it should be.
Yeah.